writers are a creative bunch. Unfortunately, they don't always have the time to work on their craft. That's why Frank rented a cabin in the woods for a night. He hoped the isolated and time alone would allow him a chance to get some writing done. But he kept getting interrupted by a series of bizarre interactions. First, his father. Then, his wife. Before he knew what was happening, Frank was stuck in a fight for his life as his insecurities and anxieties began attacking him from every angle. What Frank hoped would be a quiet time alone quickly turned into a nightmare. One in which Cabin 818 would never allow him to escape from. Welcome back to This Week in Indies. You know, the one key advantage indies have always had is not having to adhere directly to a formulaic, right-to-market mentality that has always kind of been a mantra of the traditional model. However, in the wake of several different controversies and the growth of indie publishing over recent years, does more responsibility fall on us to help continue to make this model stand into the forefront, rather than be the taboo, niche, stigmatized alternative way to get a book out into the world? We'll discuss this and more on our roundtable discussion panel. Plus, we have another great indie connection with C.L. Cannon as we enter the wardrobe of the Lion and the Witch and head into that magical land of Narnia and a bunch of indie books that go along with that theme. And then in the final 5 minutes, David Bowles will gallop on in and give us a little taste of the Westward Saga. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, and get ready to chat about these issues and more with your host, Joe Compton. Hello, everybody, and welcome to This Week in Indies. I am your host, Joe Compton. It's wonderful to have you. We have a jam-packed show for you. But unfortunately, this week we lost a really, really cool indie. Somebody that I got to know as I started my journey. And he was a big part of what we did early on at Go Indie Now. He appeared on several of our shows over time. And he was just a wonderful guy, really interesting to talk to, has such a great, interesting background. And he loved writing fantasy. He loved talking about fantasy. And we spent some time together, over the course of the years. And, unfortunately, we lost him this week. And so I put a little tribute together of my friend Tom, and then we'll get to talking about what we're here to talk about. Thank you so much, Tom, for everything you did for me early on in my career. It meant so much, and you're going to be missed, my friend. So here's a little tribute, and then we'll get to the show, everybody.
Kind of reached a point where I needed to get a steady income because it was never steady. So I decided to retire. And when I did, I had some friends just say I'd written a story, and I showed it to them. And they said, "You should start writing." So I did.
Never an easy way to start our show, but nonetheless, we had to do it. So I appreciate that. For everybody giving me that moment, and welcome to our roundtable discussion panel. It looks like we've lost a couple people, but hopefully they come back. Karina, we can't see you, just so you know.
I think Karina needs a minute.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. I gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't know about Tom, so yeah. So we'll say hi to Anita and hi to Tiffany, who are here. Hello, everybody. And thank you, Tiffany. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It was tough news. Anyway, I'm sorry. It's just a weird transition. So,
Yeah.
but it's never easy. But welcome, guys. It's nice to have you all here. Hopefully, Lindsay comes back in. But let's go around the horn and have everybody introduce themselves real quickly, and then we'll get to talking what we came to talk about. So, Alexander, why don't you start us off, please?
Hey there, guys. My name is Alexander Gideon. You probably have seen my face if you've been around Go Indie now for a while, but my writing style can best be summed up by the phrase, "and many people died." I am the author of the Books of the Law series through Falstaff Books out of Charlotte, North Carolina. First two books are out. Third is in editing and should be out this year at some point. If you like Aleister Crowley and you like your magic used a lot and often, then you'll absolutely love this historic fantasy series.
Mr. Bowles, welcome to our show. Thank you for joining us. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Joe. Glad to be here. Well, I'm a late starter in the book business. I only started about 20 years ago. And I'll tell you, I'm a lot older than most folks on this thing. And my first two books were prior to independent publishing. Everything has certainly changed, and this was a good subject I'm glad to be here to talk about today.
Awesome. We're happy to have you. Thank you for being here. All right, Adam?
Hi there. My name's Adam Gaffin, and I'm coming to you from the rocky and rolling area of southern Colorado. We just had another earthquake this morning, so that was fun to wake up to. But very happy to be here and talk with this great group of authors.
It's nice to have you, sir. Thank you for braving the earthquakes. We appreciate it. We've had high winds here, so I can understand how weather can affect things. I was down and out for a couple of days, actually.
Yeah. It took like 4 restarts for my computer to say, "All right, fine, I'm over being shaken at 5 o'clock in the morning."
I'm sorry, Karina. I didn't know you didn't know, so I apologize for breaking the news and making you feel the way you did. Was not my intention.
It was a shock. I've known him for years in the writing group that we had. AB, I can't even remember it now. It's so long ago, but yeah, I knew him really well, and I knew that he was ill. I just didn't know the news, but yeah, I mean, it's not your fault that you had to break it to me. I was going to hear it from somewhere, but yeah, it was a little bit of a shock. Hey everyone, Karina Gantis here. I am a prolific author with 14 books. One of them, that way, there we go, Broken Chains, which is my dark mafia romance. I'm also a podcaster, YouTuber, booktuber. I have a radio show, and I have a TV show called Behind the Pen.
Nice.
Awesome. Welcome. All right, we see
Right
Lindsay's forehead. There he is. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome back, sir.
Hi,
Tell
everyone.
everybody a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Lindsay Kinsella. I am science fiction author of the Lazarus Taxa. And that's about all I've got going for myself at the moment. I'm still quite new at this, but I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Nice. I think in the history of this show, that's the first time we've ever had a forehead on it.
I love Lindsay coming in like a wizard is never late.
I was already here, and then my computer decided to die. So,
all right. So, I mean, there was this auspicious anniversary, which I really don't want to talk about because that was just a mess. This whole controversy idea,
Yeah.
But there was an auspicious anniversary of 3 years ago that there was a certain book that came out that caught fire in everybody's eyes, and then created this incredible backlash on Twitter and everything like that, right? And so, and then, for better or worse, the publishing landscape had to change and things had to adjust. And so I thought it would be a really good time to talk about where we are, because also the other thing that has been bandied about is that indie publishing is growing and growing rapidly, and it's starting to overtake the traditional model in a lot of senses, right? So, I mean, neither will ever go away. But there was always this kind of us versus them mentality, and really it wasn't that much there. It was more created media wise and everything like that. But I mean, because most of us are hybrids to begin with, right? I mean, that's kind of sitting in the middle is kind of not the easy way, but the more comfortable way to sit with certain things that we write and how we write them. So, but something about the indie publishing world that's always been fascinating is the idea that we have this risk mentality, right? Where the reason why we publish our stuff is because we want to maintain the control of the aspects of the creative process in which we create from. And so in doing so, that would seemingly just by osmosis kind of tailor toward recklessness and tailor toward, a kind of loose responsibility aspect, which has not been the case. We're all professionals here. I can say that proudly and loudly and say we've taken this very seriously. We've taken this as kind of a business aspect of things. But as we do, filter in and grow and become bigger and more in the mainstream, these controversies seem to come up a lot more. People start to bring up drama, things happen. And so I wanted to talk a little bit, and I wanted to start and open it up to you all about where you feel like our responsibility lies. Is there a mantle or a spot in which we need to take to kind of, be responsible for representing the indie community? Is you feel like that's a part of your business model, or do you feel like you just putting out your creative energy, and now however it's perceived and however you want to move it forward is on you? How do you all feel about that, for the collective versus the individual? I guess is kind of how I want to start.
I think that's a hard question to answer in some ways. And also, I think my personal view is I am the president. I am not the president of any associations. I am not representative in any way of the indie community as a whole. And I think expecting any one person at any time to be is always damaging, whether it's the indie community, whether it's, any culture, anything. Like, expecting anybody to have to be representative of their profession, whatever, is always a bad thing to look at. And it's, it's damaging both for us, because that's too much pressure to put on anyone. It's also damaging for any belief out there, is that, if one person had a bad experience with one self-published book, should they never read another self-published book ever? And that would be unfair, because, as much as we love self-published books and small press books and all of those, we also know, especially in self-publishing, is as great as it has gotten, there's a lot of crap out there, and a lot of crap that's almost free as well because of where it is. And especially now with the prevalence or the beginning prevalence of a lot of the AI stuff, which can be an entirely other topic, that's been flooding some of the short story markets. It's no one can be representative here, and I think, like I said, I think it's just damaging to make somebody representative.
Yeah, I have to agree. As an indie author, I am responsible to myself, and I get my feedback from the readers. If I don't put out something that they want to read, then then that's on me. If I do things which turn people away, then that's on me. If I do things that make people want to read it, again, that's on me. As for the community, I am perfectly happy to support other indie authors who I feel align with what I'm trying to put out there. Who come at it professionally, and like Joe was saying, take this seriously, and do the best they can. And whatever stories they write, whatever genre they write, doesn't really matter. If they're putting their best selves out there, then I'm happy to support them.
Mm-hmm.
And by the exact same token, the people like Alexander was saying, who are pumping crap out, I'm not even going to give them the time of day. I'm not even going to acknowledge them. It's not. I'm not responsible for what they are putting out.
Mm-hmm.
David, Lindsay, Karina, you guys want to
Yeah.
chime in?
Yeah, I do, Joe.
I think I would probably
Go ahead, David.
Whatever you're making, I've been in a lot of businesses before I became an author. You got to make a good product. You're a craftsman. A writer, an author is a craftsman, and they need to craft their work well. And it's a thing of just responsibility to put out a good book. And if you want to have good reviews, honest, fair reviews, you've got to put out a good product. The consumer will decide the writers that will succeed. And that's my thoughts on that subject.
I think the only thing I'm sort of bad. I'm really broadly in agreement with the idea that we can't really represent, the indie community. I mean, it's kind of in the name. We are independent by definition. But I do think there's a responsibility on the reader to an extent. Ultimately, it's sort of the same as almost any product. If someone is going to pay you for something, you do have a responsibility to make sure that there's at least a level of quality in that product. I'm not saying that everyone has to like your book, but you have to at least do sort of bare minimum, edit it, make sure it's not absolute nonsense. So there's responsibility to others in a sense, but I think it's more for the reader as a sort of customer.
So I have a rant on this subject, but I'm just going to answer your question first, Joe, before I go on one of my things. You can't look at one book from an indie author and then judge every other indie book on that one, because everyone's different. Everyone writes different subjects. It's not about how good the writing is. It's not about the subject matter. It's about what the indie writer sees as their truth, what the indie writer wants to write about, and what they believe that they feel is good enough to put out there. But one person, like you said, like all of you've said, can't be in charge of and thought of as the whole of the indie community at all.
Well, I'm in charge of the indie community in here because we have a lot of people chatting right now. So I'm going to put them up here and say hello to Madeline, hello to AC, hello to JD. And AF Stewart brings up an excellent point in that controversies abound in both sides of publishing industry. Bad apples exist. Unfortunately, we can only strive to act ethically and professionally. And then JD chimed in and said, and the best thing to do with a bad apple is chuck it and
Mhm.
avoid it. And he wanted to thank you, Adam, for your great work on March of the Writers, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Everybody get ready. We've got prompts for you this week for that. As I always say, it's a busy week. And AC Adams says, it's up to me to put out the best possible book. That's where my responsibility
Mhm.
lies. So let's talk a little bit about personal responsibility. What do you view as your responsibility? Do you feel like your creativity is part of that responsibility? Do you feel like it has to grow in a certain way for you to feel like you're accomplishing anything? How do you feel about your personal responsibilities?
I would say that there's a lot more responsibilities as well, and it also depends on some on how you're you know where you're falling in the indie market, because there's a difference between being wholly self-published, there's a difference between being with small publisher and that kind of thing, and also on hybrid as well, because we have a responsibility with what we write. We also have a responsibility with how we appear in public on social media at events and that kind of thing. Because the other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize as a writer, especially unless you're sitting in a cave and you're just throwing books out of it, and never saying anything about it or appearing anywhere, you are a public figure. As small as that may be, you are a public figure, and you have a brand that you're going to represent. When you're self-published, your brand is your own. You represent however you want, and that's on you. But when you're with publishers, when you're with a small publisher, that kind of thing, your actions and everything beyond just what you write are going to reflect on that publisher. Just like any job that you have, your actions will be viewed by that employer and how it reflects on them. And so you do have a duty to make sure that you are not representing yourself in such a way that is going to be negatively affect your publisher, that kind of thing, bring backlash on them, and ultimately get you dropped as well. It's bad business on your end as well. And it's also making sure that you're writing things in such a way that they are being accurately represented, and that you are not encroaching onto any territory that you don't have the knowledge or the experience to represent.
I think you just came up with a new marketing strategy, Mr. Gideon, sitting in a cave and chucking books out. I think that's a great new marketing strategy. Well, I'm gonna try that one, I think.
I got that from Rachel Aaron, because that's what she said that she wants to do: just sit in a cave and just chuck her books out and let somebody else just market them.
AC says, I'm in a cave throwing out books. So I guess that's already been cornered because AC's probably really good at it.
Writing about the shadows on the wall.
All right. Everybody else want to chime in?
Sure. We have the responsibility to get our facts straight. We need to be careful when we are talking about certain groups, associations, organizations, especially when we're talking negative and we're slagging them off. But we write fiction. We entertain our readers and we give them what they want. Most of what we write is from our imagination, and those that mix the history with their fiction make sure that we get the facts straight, otherwise we'll get crucified by reviews. The thought of someone telling me that I can't write about a Russian character who's a murdering, abusive dick is rather laughable. He's mafia. What do you expect? Doe-eyed and smiling lots. The idea of being crucified by the BDSM community because I put it in a bad light, again, is laughable because it's abuse. It may be consensual abuse, but it's abuse. So I don't say anything wrong. I'm not stating anything wrong in my books. I'm stating what I see as the truth of the world. And that's what all authors do. And I think as an indie author, we should have the freedom to write what we write, to publish what we want. Whereas these publishers that are too scared to take on a controversial book or something that's going to upset a group of readers, it's laughable in this day and age with what's gone on, what we've gone through, what we've been through, what we're going to go through, to have that kind of to be prohibited to write what we want to write. As an indie author, I don't feel that. I don't I don't put a censor on my writing. I've never sat back and said, oh, I shouldn't write this because it might upset somebody, or I shouldn't write this because it's controversial. I write what I want, and I don't write to market either. I write because I want to get that out, and my readers have had no problems with it so far. And as long as people keep buying my book, not everyone's going to enjoy it, but they know what they're getting. But as an indie author, I think we should always have that freedom. It's like the freedom of speech. Where was there a line against that? Because we should have the freedom to write, and because we publish our own work, to publish our own work. Some of the books that I've read out there, if that one person, like that one blogger, read some of these books, oh my God, I can only imagine books will be banned. There are so many books out there that are worse than American Dirt ever was. And it's just the wrong person to read them. Otherwise, they're out there, the masses read them, and no one says anything. But just takes that one person.
I read Broken Chains and I loved it. So everybody, I mean, I don't know how much that means to anybody out there, but for me, it was a great book. I'd say give it a chance.
Thank you.
Anyway, I've read almost everybody's books here except for David, because I just met David. But I'm definitely going to read that. Lindsay, I'm reading your book as we're talking, so I'm real excited.
Well, now I'm terrified of the feedback now. So.
Everybody here is
he's reading it right now actively while we're talking. That's what he's doing.
yeah. That's exactly what I'm doing. and
I want people to. Yeah.
I'm sorry, say that again, sir.
I said, as that old internal conflict of a writer, I want people to read it, but then I'm terrified when they tell me they're reading it. So.
Just don't do it in front of me.
Okay, so then I may or may not be reading it. How about that? Does it help? Does that make you feel better?
That's worse. That's a sort of Schrodinger's cat type situation.
Joe's going to be over here reading it like
that. I'm not talking about it anymore. All right. Did David, you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I write what I call factual historical fiction. And my books are about my family, which I'll tell you about later. But I have to be factual because I got family members out there, about 2,000 of them, who we've found through the years. And they keep me straight and actually give me a lot of the information. But anything I put in as a date or time or a place, I get at least three known facts, documents to document it and keep it accurate. Of course, the story, I add a lot of fiction in there to carry the story on. It'd be a pretty boring story about my family if I didn't put in some fictional characters and some fictional events. But I try and write a book that's both educational and entertaining. And I don't worry too much about anything except just writing a good book.
Well, you have a double-edged sword. You have a built-in audience of 2,000 people, which is awesome. But then they're all going to criticize what you write because then it's them that you're talking about.
Well, it's unfortunate. Some of them can't read. So.
Oh.
Just joking, folks.
Adam, you want to chime in?
Well, I kind of wanted to get back to what Alexander was saying about when you are a public figure, and when you're out in public, you are representing yourself and representing what you write. unlike unlike AC, who's chucking books out of the cave. Yeah, that's a brilliant line, Alexander. Yeah, yeah. When you're out in public, you're face to face with the people who have read the books or want to read the books, or have never heard of you, and it's up to you, like Alexander said, to represent. So you get to choose who you are. You get to choose how you present yourself. And then the challenging part is being consistent with it. Remembering, okay, this is who I am when I'm in public. This is who I am around friends and family, and trying not to blur the lines too much.
I do have to give credit to Rachel Aaron. She is the one that came up with that.
Lindsay, did you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I think just the only sort of thought floating in my head there is that really I think we do all have a certain responsibility, but the beauty of being independent is that it's a self-imposed responsibility. I think we'll all do that. We'll all be conscious of certain things, whether it's, if we're writing about certain groups of people, certain nationalities even. I think that most of us would probably want to make sure that we do sufficient research on that and avoid sort of harmful stereotypes. How much responsibility each independent author has is sort of self-imposed, though. And it's a tricky one. It's a minefield, that. I tend to find myself writing in metaphors rather than anything black and white to sort of avoid those direct comparisons where possible. But it's muddy waters, really.
I love when my panel leads me into the next question. It just makes me feel like we're on the right path here. And
makes your life easier, Joe?
What's that?
Makes your life a little easier?
It does. That does it too, yes. But Lindsay, you brought it up, so I'm going to lead into it. And I'm wondering how much you all pay attention to when these things happen and how much you think about your own work in those respects. Do you feel like do you feel, for the lack of a better term, independent from that, or do you feel like you take an honest look at what you're doing when you hear of these controversies and things that happen, or when you're hearing people kind of blanketly, assume that self-publishing is just taboo and niche? I mean, that kind of mentality has kind of gone away. We've done a lot to make that happen, but I'm curious how much you guys pay attention to that and how much it resonates with you. Do you go back and check your work and make sure? Is there something you do differently? Do you feel like have you embraced maybe more sensitivity readers? How have you guys looked at what is going on? Do you pay attention to that? I'm talking in your own personal process, not just out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you sort of have to, even from purely as a sort of position of self-preservation almost. You have to take note of these things. You have to see, the sort of things which backfire on people. It's a difficult one because I know that the sort of background on this is the whole American dirt thing, and I think it's more difficult in those times where it's something which is sort of well-meaning but misses the mark with a lot of people, because you have that sort of catch-22. I think, again, responsibility is self-imposed by indie authors, but certainly for myself, I feel a sort of responsibility to, not just have blanket white characters all over the place and to have some diversity. Also, just from a sort of interesting storytelling point of view, I think it makes a cast of characters more interesting. Kind of regional and national diversity. It's just one more tool in the kind of author's arsenal to do that. But on the other hand, that then does open yourself up to the risk of getting it wrong, and ultimately no one author can live the experiences of everyone out there. It is tricky, and it's a fine line to tread, and it's where do you take those risks and where do you play it safe?
I disagree with that completely. I don't think about the risks. I don't play it safe. I never have done in my writing. As I said before, I don't censor myself. I don't think about what characters I should have. They'll come if they need to be in the book. They'll come in Italian, Russian, Greek, Portuguese, wherever. If they come in, they come in. That means they're meant to be in the book. That means they're part of the story. I don't think about what other people might think about the themes and subject matter that I write about. As I said, I write for me, and people like it or they don't. And I know what's going on. I keep an eye on what's going on, but I don't figure that in my writing. I think that if I ever sit back and think, oh, I shouldn't write this, then I'm going to stop writing. Simple as that. That's not me.
I think there can be a lot of factors in it as well. I think it really depends on who you're representing in that kind of thing, and the way you're writing it. I think it's less of a who you are including as characters and more how they're being portrayed. If I wrote a book, and another caveat on that as well is that, you have the freedom of speech also, but doesn't mean freedom of consequences and freedom of the opinions of others. And so you have this fine line in where you're published, who you're published through, and how you're doing it. And it's taking risks isn't a bad thing, but it really depends on what you want to get out of your writing. And especially if you're like, my main focus is making money on this, not just enjoying my writing. You do have to take a look at what you're writing and how will this be received, and is this something that could end my career if it went, horribly south by doing this? And I think it's also representation. If I wrote a book that was just horribly racist and had and just reinforced stereotypes of whichever race or nationality that I chose, I should be burned to the ground. And I think that's more than fair in general. But there's also, where cultural appropriation, where those kinds of things come in, can be really muddy as well. I think it's writing what you know and know that you know well is a good thing. And that doesn't mean that you've had to have already had the experience. It means that you have gone into it enough to know that you're not representing this harmfully to a group, especially a marginalized group. I would be somewhat comfortable in having more Native American characters, only in that I had 8 of the largest Pawnee men you've ever seen teach me how to sing, and travel with them to powwows and sing with them and that kind of thing. And it's like, that's where those experiences come in. And it's, if you have never especially and here in the States, I think it can be a lot different, but it's like, if you're a white person and you have barely ever had any contact with any, African-American people, probably not a good idea for you to write a point of view character that is African-American and is representing the African-American experience,
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Alexander, and that was one that I was going to bring up. It depends really on where you're taking these characters to and from. And if you're falling back on kind of stereotypical characters, stock characters, I mean, that's just bad writing. That's lazy writing. You're not creating. But if you're coming up with characters who are genuine, who are real, who are in your head talking to you and saying, this, and this, and they're telling their stories, then you've gotten away from, okay, I'm using this character because reasons. And to that, I see where Karina's coming from as well, because I don't, my characters are who they are. Joe, you've read them, and you know especially about Kendra. She's definitely a one of a kind character, and writing her is just how she is. And if people like it, great. And if people don't like it, okay, they don't have to buy the book.
I love me some Kendra, but I would always be afraid if I ever met her that she'd just punch me in the face. So.
Well, she might, but that's usually her second option.
Right. No, that's awesome. Yeah. David, you want to chime in?
Yeah, this last book was quite a bit. The last two books were a lot about Native American Indians, and some of it's good about the Indians, about what they did, and some of it's horrible, but it's factual. And I've not had any complaints that I showed the Indians versus the settlers one way or the other. I haven't had that happen. And there was pretty gruesome things I had to explain in the last two books about some Indian raids. And even my great grandmother, her home was burned down by Indians, and the only thing that survived was a family Bible. And I still have that. I'm the owner of that Bible, fortunate enough to be. And but there's things that happen that I write them the way the reports are, and what happened. One situation, the sheriff's written report that was written in 1841. He said, "I will not try and describe what I saw that the Indians had done to this man." And I thought, that for an old rough sheriff like that to make a statement like that, it had to be pretty bad. So, you just write it. I write it like it is. And if somebody doesn't like it, they don't have to buy the book.
There you go, David. Perfect.
I think something that should really be known as well when we're that should be accepted across the board as well, is that people in general are capable of amazing kindness and horrible, horrible cruelty. And none of us of anything, because white people have done terrible things, but people of all, continents and races and everything have done horrible things. I think a really great representation is the book Things Fall Apart. And I love that, and I love hearing the author talking about it, because I don't know if you guys have ever read it. I cannot remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it is about a village in Africa, and the main character, Okonkwo, is morally gray at best, generally not necessarily a great person. Really, like he's violent. He does all of this, and the author's intention, and the author himself is African, was there's so much either representation of horrible savagery, or just this like romanticization of it's just so much greater and everything. And he's like, the truth is, it's a society like everything else. Some people in it are crappy, and some people in it are really great. And it was meant to be a true representation of what the culture actually is like. And I think that's where we kind of get lost sometimes any negative representation of any part of a culture is always seen as an attack. But you also have to see like where you're thinking. I'm an American white guy. Anytime I'm writing about any other group, I'm going to be put under a microscope because of it, because of historically where my position has been, and where my demographic has not been amazing. And I think that's some of that awareness you've got to be in your representation of, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to be seen as, whether or not that is the case, and I have to be conscious of that.
Yeah. Terrible people can do good things.
The author's name is Chinua Achebe. I hope I said
Yeah.
that correctly.
It's a great book. It can be a hard read at sometimes because there's some bad things that happen. There's bad things that Okonkwo does, but I think it's a really good read.
Yeah, good people do
JD
terrible
brought up a
things,
couple
and
things
terrible
here.
people do good things.
I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
Adam. Go ahead.
I don't think he heard you.
Oh, I was just saying, I was just agreeing with Alexander that, terrible people do good things and good people do terrible things. And sometimes they can do a good thing and then do a terrible thing and then do another good thing. And within 5 minutes.
We'll be reminisced as authors if we don't write about that, if we leave out that and don't write about the darkness that is out there in the world. People don't want to read about it; they don't need to. But we're just being real. We're not writing anything that's not real. So I think we're doing ourselves an injustice if we censor ourselves for things like that.
I think we also have to make sure that we're including the good with the bad. I think that's where the ball gets dropped a lot of the time.
That makes it entertaining then.
Well, in one of the weirder segues of the year, we'll go from truth and responsibility and risk and talking about things that are real into quite the biggest, probably one of the biggest fantasy worlds in the history of fantasy worlds, and the Indie Connection's all about it this week. Let's jump into the wardrobe and take a trip to Narnia with CL Cannon.
Hey guys, CL Cannon here from Fiction Atlas Press, bringing you another Indie Connection. Today I'd like to tell you about some indie books that you might enjoy if you're a fan of The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. The first book I have for you is called A Soul as Cold as Frost by Jennifer Kropf. 16-year-old Helen Bell understood tragedy better than most kids growing up. She knew what it was like to wear clothes from donation bins and be mocked by the beautiful girls in school. She thought these brutal experiences made her ready for anything, but she wasn't ready for this. After an eccentric girl opens Helen's eyes to let her see the realm of winter, a world with intersects tucked carefully into the cracks of her own, where monarchs have risen and fallen, it's forbidden to mention the name of the dead king of winter, and the currency is gold rings. Helen comes to realize the downtown confrontation was more significant than what the eccentric girl let on. When Helen receives a summons from the Crimson Court to enter into the Quarrel of Sword and Bone, a traditional duel performed before 1,000 witnesses that leaves only one survivor, she's forced to finally pay attention to the boy who's been following her around with a warning on his tongue. The second book I have for you is called Sacred is Lura's Calling by M.C. Beeler. An orphaned girl, a mysterious new world, one connected fate. When Beatrice Tidal is shipped off to a summer camp by her foster parents, she expects the worst, but she does not expect to find herself pursued by a shadowy demon through a strange magical land where she must uncover the mystery of her past and rise to the challenges of her future. Worse, Obelius Kalar, usurper to the throne of Eslura, will stop at nothing to find Beatrice and prevent her from gathering the sacred rulers to reunite the kingdom. Now Obelius has escaped from his island prison confinements and is determined to regain his throne. Can Beatrice help these powerful rulers and save Eslura from Obelius? Or will the shadow of darkness fall forever over the sacred land? The third book I have for you is called The Curse of the Arcadian Stone by S.R. Breaker. She was solely created to guard a legendary relic, but when a rogue thief from Earth disrupts her dreary world, her job won't be the only thing she loses. There's only so much for a bored 3,000-year-old fairy to do in the forest. A nameless fairy dubbed Magenta knows she only exists to serve a specific purpose, to guard the most powerful relic in the land of Arcadia. And for thousands of years, she succeeded in fending off even the most dangerous of threats. But when a rogue stranger from Earth offers her something much more precious in exchange for the relic, will she accede even if it risks her very existence? Josh Richards is nothing if not resourceful. But it still took him nearly a year to find the one thing powerful enough to ensure his much overdue return to Earth. And if a little deception is all he requires to finally get his hands on it, how bad could the consequences really be? The last thing Josh needs is a snarky forest fairy with a vendetta. So why can't he just seem to leave her behind? The last book I have for you is called The Ancestor's Key by Marie-Helene Lebeau. It started with a magic key that could open a door to anywhere. 15-year-old Lola just said goodbye to life as a loner. One minute she's living with her mom in Baltimore and hanging out with her best friend Jane, and the next she's receiving the keys to a southern mansion, boatloads of money, and an ancient family secret. She has no idea how she's going to cope with a long-lost dad, an eccentric aunt, and a drop-dead gorgeous boy that keeps popping up everywhere she turns. Not to mention the magical book and the skeleton key that just appeared out of nowhere. Okay, that's all for me this week. I'll see you next week on Indie Connection. Bye!
Another great indie connection. Thank you to C.L. Cannon for that wonderful, wonderful look at books that you can get that are indie. If you like the Chronicles of Narnia and C.S. Lewis and all the fun things that go along with that series. We had some... Oh. All right. Sorry, everybody. There was a little delay there. And I just like doing this. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so we had some great comments here while we were playing around. AC says, "Me, I write what I want to write and what I think I ought to be. And if people like it, great. If they don't, then it wasn't for them." JD says, "So curious people who don't read anything at all." I think David, he was commenting on your joke there. And then that phase of the day to all the chugging. Yeah, we already did that one. JD wrote 2 points. Number one is some people claim to be 1/18th Cherokee, and it's like, fuck?
It's always Cherokee.
And JD says, also know what you're writing. I've been bordering on DNFing a book because Hispanic representation is mega cringe. And then Jonathan's here. Hey, Jonathan, nice to see you, as always. And then JD says, and hey, as humans, we're not as consistent as people want us to be. Absolutely. And then Jonathan says, sometimes people know not what they do. And JD says, we have plenty of suck moments, I suspect. And yes, I would suspect the same. You know what I love more than my panel leading me into my next question? It's when the chat leads me into the next question. And JD put up a comment that was exactly what I wanted to talk about to end the show today. And he says, hey, one of my coolest moments was selling a book and later in the Comic-Con going for a bio break and seeing 2 people in the corner reading me. And so in that respect, I wanted to know from each of you all, in a moment when you took a risk, whether you feel like it's a personal risk or a professional risk within your writing process and your creative process, that paid off. I want to hear some success stories from something you did that you go, all right, cool, I pulled that off.
Oh, I'll go first. Broken Chains, that is my success story. It is dark, it's graphic, it's violent, it is my bestseller. It's won 4 book awards. It's translated in 4 different languages. Now, if that's not saying something...
Come on, you're all going to go, so you might as well just jump in.
Well, I mean, I'll throw it out there. I have a science fiction series. There are 7 books in this universe, and it's centered around a lesbian couple, Kendra and Ayana, and I don't make a big deal of the fact that they're married to each other. It's just who they are, and people are just like, okay, sure, we'll go with it. We like these characters, so yay.
Oh, I can say something, Joe. One of my first book, I wrote something that in my mind was totally fiction. And it's something I created, and some 10, 15 years later, that event turned out to be just as I described it in my book. But I had no documentation to know and that was not the first, that was the first time that ever happened. And it's happened to me 2 or 3 times. It's a spooky feeling to write about a location, a place that you've never been, and to walk into that building and it's just like you wrote it in the book. Now, that makes the hair on the back of my neck curl up when I think about it. But that's happened to me several times.
You got powers, David.
Well, I hope so.
I think for me, I'm sort of still in the process of taking what is probably my biggest artistic risk, in the sense that only my second book in, I've completely changed genre and sort of target audience. I went from sort of gritty adult sci-fi to my next book, which is sort of light-hearted young adult fantasy. I suppose we'll see in the coming months how that pans out, but beta read for the feedback. So I'm going to count that as a success so far. We'll find out if it stays that way.
I would say that I haven't taken an incredible amount of risk to date yet, but I think I wouldn't even call it a risk, but knowing how things can be received and the kind of people that will not like what I will be writing going forward. And it's the fact that back in October, I put out a blog post that really put out something that wasn't secret, but I hadn't been public with. And it's the fact that I am pansexual. And making that fully public let me have a mindset shift. And I very much plan to have a lot more queer representation in my books, not necessarily as the theme, but as something that is definitely very prevalent as well. I also want to have more male couples, just because if you look at a lot of media and that kind of thing and representation, we have a lot of women together, but we tend to have a lot of media that doesn't want to show men together. And that kind of perpetuates fetishization, which is always a hard word for me to say. And I want to get away from that. And so there's going to be some choices that I'll make in these current series and things down the road that I know are shouldn't be controversial, but there's going to be demographics, people that are going to hate it. And, review bombing and that kind of thing is something I expect at some point. And so call it a risk. I just call it having accurate representation.
You need to read the books on Wattpad, Alexander. There's plenty of stories with Eminem on there.
They're definitely there. They're just not mainstream media, and that's the thing. That was the thing that I absolutely loved about episode 3 of The Last of Us, and I think that's why that episode was so very important. And I love Neil Druckmann for changing his own story in the way that he did for that one.
I was going to say, as far as risks go with your creative process, and I'm not, thank you for sharing the risk you shared, but man, you probably took the greatest risk, because John Hartnett stood up and said, I don't have a story about Aleister Crowley. And you stood up and said, I'm going to write that. To do that in front of John Hartnett and then pull it off, I think that's the biggest risk that you could take.
I mean, I do think that I was pretty qualified there in a lot of...
But still, I mean, you stood up and you said, I'm going to do it, and you did it. So
I mean, I am a queer pagan man, so we have a lot. I had a lot in common with Crowley. I'm not the misogynistic asshole that he was, but at least try not to be.
Giddy says Babe Ruth calling the homer. But AC wanted to share her win, and that's awesome. I'll put this out there. I created a brand new theology in my Kalila books, which totally go against trad, Xantian beliefs, and people have embraced it. Sorry for butchering all those words. But yeah, so I guess I'll share mine, personal risk. So when I created my first book, Amongst the Killing, I wanted to write a crime thriller that was more akin to the reality of crime in a certain respect, and procedurals in a lot of respects, but not make it true crime. I felt like that was one of the things. Like, it was either going to be really cozy, or it was going to be really, like, there was details missing, because as a Marine watching movies about Marines, I noticed the very little things that they don't pay attention to, like ribbons being upside down on their uniform and things like that. And so I didn't want the same thing to happen with my books as a cop thriller. And so the risk I took was I read a true crime book with that was about the LAPD's homicide division, and I reached out to the publisher to talk to the author, and they got me the author's name, and then the author got me in touch with the retired LAPD homicide detective who the book was about, and he followed. And I met with that detective, and that hour and a half was invaluable to me, and all the resources that I had. And then he was available to me throughout the rest of his life. He has passed away since, but he made it available, and he made sure that when I wrote something and I sent it to him, he sent it to all his other cop buddies, so his opinion wasn't the only opinion I got. I got like 7 or 8 different opinions from LAPD, especially those who were a little bit older, because my story is written in the late 70s. And so I really felt like I took a risk in reaching out to a publisher who I had no idea how to, I didn't know how to do any of that. This was, 2005. It was, when I did that. And so, it wasn't like that was something you knew how, the internet was growing, but it was still kind of, not in that vein, in that respect yet. And so I was doing all that and took the risk, and I think it paid off, because I think I wrote a very genuine, authentic book about cops that I really feel like I was very proud of. So, and JD says definitely not cozy. Fantastic, not cozy. Yes, I did not write a cozy. That is for sure. All right. So thank you for all of you sharing. I appreciate that. And Lindsay, we'll look forward to you resharing down the road and telling us how the risk paid off. I love that we have somebody who's in mid-risk. That's pretty cool. So
for you, maybe.
Yeah. I love it. And so yeah, thank you all for sharing that. And thank you for this wonderful, wonderful conversation. We'll go around the horn one more time, and you tell everybody where they can find y'all, and then we'll talk about March of the Writers, and we'll hear from Mr. Bowles, who's got a wonderful last 5 minutes for us. But Lindsay, why don't you go ahead and start us off? Tell everybody where they can find you, sir.
So again, I'm Lindsay Kinsella. I do the majority of my sort of social media marketing on Facebook, so you can find me on Lindsay Kinsella, the Lazarus Taxa. And you can find the book effectively all the usual online bookstores. So yeah, thank you very much.
Nice. Thank you. All right, Karina?
So I'm everywhere, and you've got my link tree down there to check out my shows and all my books. And if you think that Broken Chains was dark, you wait till you read the new one I'm working on.
Uh-oh. All right, Adam?
Okay, so Adam Gaffin, right, near future science fiction. You can find me at CassidyChronicles.com. That has links to all of the books, my appearances at cons, and on social media. Just look for Adam Gaffin. That's probably me, because it's. I think I've only ever seen one other person with a name similar to it online ever. So.
Nice. Thank you for being here, sir. Appreciate it. All right, Alexander?
You guys, you can find me right down here at alexandergideon.net. Links to all of my socials. You can sign up for my newsletter, which I've not been as heavy on, but will be returning more in the next couple of months. And I do giveaways, that kind of thing. I follow all the news about me, all the releases. Also, if you happen to be in the Atlanta area next month, I think it's the third weekend, Jordan Con is happening in Atlanta, and I'll be a guest there. So you can come find me and buy some books.
I believe you and I will see each other in June as well in Carolina.
Unfortunately, not.
Oh,
I will not be at Con Carolinas. I will be playing a $130,000 prize pool Magic the Gathering tournament that same weekend that I qualified for. So.
Yeah, I can understand that now. All right.
Unfortunately.
All right, and I'm Joe Compton, and you're at Go Indie Now. Congratulations. Smash those like buttons and subscribe buttons and all that wonderful jazz, and thank you for doing so. And check out everything we're doing. I just released a new episode, actually restarted the second season of Words That Kill. It's a fantastic episode about murderous betrayal with fantasy author Bree Tart. And it is really, really fun and really exciting, a really great show. And that's a really great episode. So everybody go check that out. We also have 3-act structure going on right now. All the great shows we have. We have Indie Mayhem on Monday. So another round of Indie Mayhem on Monday, and then Mean Reviews on Tuesday, and Wednesday, Character Driven with Madeline Dale. And then we have Friday evening with the Talking Indie Mayhem, which is the talk show about the game show, and that should be a lot of fun as well. So, and then we circle back to another This Week in Indies, and we have, as we've been doing all March long, we're talking about March of the Writers, and this is your prompts for this week. We have the Quirky Quirk prompt, which is some people are methodical, some people are quirky, some people are certifiable. What are some of your most notable writer quirks? And then we go to the writing desk tour. Show us where the writing magic happens. Nobody wants to see my desk, I promise you. Time suck. Apps that take a lot of your time. Procrastination happens. What are some of the apps and things that are super powerful at sucking up and loose time if you have lying around? Reoccurring currents, reoccurring the themes in your work. Are there themes that consistently pop in your work? And then common mistakes, common errors in your writing. Typos suck. They suck really bad, but some have a way of making their way into our manuscripts. And if you could read this on JD's blog, I really highly suggest you do, because he writes it where there are a bunch of typos in it, which is really clever. What are some of your most common typos and that are so common that you have to keep an eye out for them? Then we go to life balance. What do you do for physical, mental health? So often we see fellow writers struggling, and also we struggle, which is so important to stay healthy in body of mind. What are some of the things you do to cope and stay healthy? And then finally, tough love. Roughest critiques you've ever received. Some people mean well, but they have no tact and pull no punches. What are some of the rougher critiques you received that stung but helped you out in the long run? So that's your writing prompts for week four of March of the Writers. And I hope you all are participating and enjoy doing so. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. And if you do, those are the hashtags you want to use. We also have those in the description, March of the Writers and MOT 2023. Participate. It's never too late. You can jump in right now and just do week 4 prompts if you want to, or go all the way back to the beginning, or pick out the ones you like and do those. However you want to do it, there is no rhyme or reason to it, but JD loves to see you guys all out there, and he and I will both recycle whatever you put out there. So tag Go Indie Now as well, and I will make sure I share it out there as well. That being said, enough of all of us yapping, because it's now time for Mr. David Bowles and his last 5 minutes. So, David, please, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, my latest book is The Sheriff of Starr County, Texas. And that wasn't the name that I chose for it, but when I sent it out to my ARC readers, I asked them, I said, what do you think's the best name for this book? And half of them said, The Sheriff of Starr County. I called one of them and I said, why'd you pick that name? And he said, that's what the book's about, the Sheriff of Starr County. And he really was the Sheriff of Starr County, not elected as most sheriffs in Texas are. He was appointed as the first sheriff for Starr County. And those of you that watch the news, we're talking 1850s time period. And that, you think this country is not rough, you see it on TV. That's the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. And the Rio Grande City is right in the center of everything that's going on there right now with the cartels and what have you. So it was rough then and it's rough now. So nothing has changed. I actually was going to try and do an appearance down there, and one of the city leaders told me, Mr. Bowles, you don't belong down here. Not now. You need to stay away unless you've got a good police escort. That's a sad thing for America, but that's the way it is. And that's the way I wrote the book. Hasn't changed much in 100 and some odd years, but The Sheriff of Starr County is a fun book with a lot of excitement in it. This sheriff, he was a single guy, and he found two very interesting women, and they make great characters. They are fictional characters, but most of the story is as accurate as can be. And it's a very educational story about how the compromise of 1850 affected Texas. And if you see over my right shoulder there, you see a map where Texas goes all the way up to the 42nd parallel, which is the Wyoming border. And from 1845 to 1850, that was where the Texas boundaries were. And an interesting story ends with how that 1850 compromise came about. In Texas, it wasn't about slavery. The 1850 compromise was about their border. And all that land, 63 million acres that you see east of the Rio Grande, was sold to the United States government for $10 million. That figures out about 15 cents. But it was kind of it's quite a story, and it's a true story about how the boundary dispute of 1850 came about. And so it's historical, it's educational, and it dadgum sure is entertaining. And it's getting great reviews everywhere we've gone. The book just came out in February, getting it distributed. I'm going around doing book signings, and it's catching on, and I'm really proud of that book. And I'm just now beginning to work on the sequel to The Sheriff of Starr County. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you about my book.
You want to say the magic words for us? Do you remember what it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Not thinking about that. But I forgot to tell you that my website about me is David A. Bowles, Bowles, just like on the screen, author, at David A. Bowles author.com. And then about the books, the Westward Sagas, and there are over 100 stories on that on my website for the westwardsagas.com. And I'm sorry, I missed that email, but I don't know the magic word.
It's always time to go indie now.
I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. It's always time to go indie now.
It's always time to go indie now. Okay.